What would you do if you walked into your own company, yet no one recognized you, and they even looked down on you? And if you discovered that the place once built on trust had now turned into nothing more than cold indifference, would you have the courage to change everything, to start over from the smallest things? Follow the story of Elias Rowan, the man who quietly disguised himself as an ordinary customer to witness the truth, and how he turned a showroom filled with apathy into a place that restored the most valuable thing of all: trust. Morning at the largest showroom of PureWave Systems. The white lights reflected off rows of gleaming water purifiers, every surface shining with a cold mirror like precision. Customers moved quietly between the displays, the soft sound of footsteps blending with the steady hum of ventilation fans. At the center, a man stood still, his deep gaze taking in every detail. He wore a simple light gray shirt, no logo, no name tag, looking no different from an ordinary customer. But he was far from ordinary. This was Elias Rowan, the chairman of the very corporation that owned this showroom. No one recognized him, and no one seemed to care. 3 employees stood only a few meters away, yet not a single glance was directed toward him. One of them, Colin, was busy live streaming on his phone, his voice confident with a hint of mockery. If you want to make money fast, don't waste your time with cheap customers. They just ask questions and leave, never spending a dime. The other 2 were focused entirely on comparing commission charts on a tablet, circling the bright red numbers without once looking up. Elias stepped closer, the sound of his shoes tapping against the polished stone floor echoing clearly, but still no one turned around. His voice, low and firm, finally broke the air. The AquaPro R1 model. The listed price is $1,299, correct? Colin glanced at him lazily, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. Wrong. The price is almost double now. Don't trust those old tags. Everyone knows that. With that, he turned back to his phone, continuing his empty chatter for his live stream audience. Elias stayed silent, his eyes lingering on the young employee's face. There was no anger, no outburst, just a heavy weight in his gaze. He looked around, at the gleaming machines under the sterile white lights, at the employees standing there with detached indifference, and he realized a harsh truth. In the very company his father had spent a lifetime building, he was being treated like a stranger, worse, like someone completely invisible. Under the cold glow of the showroom lights, that indifference felt like a blade cutting through the pride he once thought was unshakable. But perhaps this very moment would mark the beginning of a change no one could have expected. Leaving the cold, sterile air of the showroom behind, Elias stepped into the old storage room at the end of the hallway. The metal door creaked open with a dry groan, like the weary sigh of a place long forgotten. A dim yellow bulb flickered weakly overhead, casting uneven light over rows of rusted shelves, coated in layers of dust. The faint smell of dampness and old metal lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of faded paper. Elias moved slowly, each step on the concrete floor echoing hollowly, as if waking up memories that had been sleeping for years. He stopped in front of a corner where a thick grey cloth draped over something large. His hand brushed it lightly, sending years of dust swirling into the weak light. With a firm pull, Elias drew the cloth away, his breath catching slightly in the stillness. Before him stood an old photograph, framed in simple, worn wood, its edges frayed with time. In the picture, a kind-faced, middle-aged man rested a gentle hand on the shoulder of a young employee, both of them smiling brightly in front of old-generation water purifiers. That man was Arthur Rowan, his father, the man who had built PureWave Systems from nothing, starting with only a few crude machines and an endless reservoir of passion. Elias's fingers brushed the dusty glass, his deep eyes lingering on his father's smile. Memories came rushing back. Arthur walking through showrooms, greeting every employee by name, wiping smudges off the machines with his own hands, always beginning conversations with a smile and ending with the same question. "Have you had some water yet? Are you feeling well enough to greet customers today?" Arthur didn't just sell water purifiers. He sold trust. He sold genuine care. A tightness rose in Elias's chest. His voice, low and almost a whisper, meant only for the photograph, slipped out. "They don't even bother to check the prices anymore, Father. I don't know when we lost what you believed was most important." In that moment, the dark, dusty storage room seemed to fade away, leaving only Elias and the warm, kind eyes of Arthur in the faded photograph. And in that quiet moment, something solid began to form inside Elias. A silent, unwavering resolve. One that wouldn't just change a single store, but could breathe life back into an entire legacy that had been slowly forgotten. Elias stepped out of the old storage room, the weight in his chest pressing heavier with every breath. He returned to the main showroom floor, but this time not to ask about prices or inspect the machines. He was here to see everything through the eyes of a man who once believed this place was built on kindness. Standing in a quiet corner, the stark white lights stretched his shadow long across the polished tile floor. Everything appeared perfect, just as the reports claimed. The machines were neatly arranged, the promotional banners shone bright, and the numbers on paper likely showed steady growth. But what Elias saw told a completely different story. A well-dressed, middle-aged customer stood at the service counter, holding a crumpled brochure. He waited nearly 5 minutes, glancing around awkwardly, hoping for someone to approach him, but no one did. Each employee was absorbed in their own world, oblivious to his presence. Across the showroom, a young couple stood in front of a row of premium models, their faces showing clear uncertainty. Their eyes searched for guidance, but instead of genuine help, Liam, an employee with a perfectly pressed shirt, walked up and spoke in a low voice that felt more like a warning than advice. "If you don't buy the premium maintenance package, the machine will likely break down. Repairs will cost you a lot of money. Trust me, I've worked here long enough to know." The couple exchanged hesitant glances, then reluctantly nodded, agreeing not because they felt assured, but because they had been steered by fear. Elias stood silently, but every word, every gesture from that employee felt like a blade cutting deep into him. This was no longer a place that sold water purifiers. It was no longer a place that gave customers peace of mind. They had learned to turn customer anxiety into a tool for profit. They no longer smiled to serve. They smiled to calculate. Elias closed his eyes briefly, his hand tightening around the financial report he still held. Growth rates, profit margins, return on investment. Suddenly, all of it felt meaningless. When he opened his eyes, his gaze swept across the entire showroom, colder than it had ever been. In that moment, Elias spoke silently to himself, as if delivering a verdict against the very system he was running. We're not selling water purifiers anymore. We're selling indifference. And that painful truth would be the spark that ignited a change he could no longer turn back from. Amid the heavy atmosphere, just as Elias was on the verge of despair over what he had witnessed, a different scene caught his eye. Small, but so different that it was enough to keep a faint glimmer of hope alive. In a quiet corner of the showroom, where few people bothered to look, Lucia Hale, a young employee with neatly tied brown hair, was patiently leaning beside an elderly woman. Her voice was soft but filled with genuine enthusiasm. Press this icon, then wait about 3 seconds. Yes, that's it. Now the machine is connected. The tension on the woman's face gradually melted into a relieved smile. Lucia didn't stop there. She carefully explained a few more steps, making sure the customer understood everything before leaving. There was no upselling, no suggestion of expensive ad ends, no sense of rushing to get back to chasing numbers. When the woman smiled, thanked her, and slowly made her way to the door, Lucia bent down to straighten a crooked price tag and gently wiped a thin layer of dust off the base of a display unit. Everything she did was natural, with no manager watching, no other customers to impress. It wasn't required of her. It was simply her choice. Elias stood a few feet away, silently observing. Something stirred inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time, but once knew well. Pride. The image of Lucia caring for every detail reminded him of his father, Arthur Rowan, and the days when Arthur walked through showrooms with a cloth in hand, smiling as he checked on every employee, not for the sake of sales, but because he believed every customer deserved respect. In that moment, Elias realized not everything had been lost. Small and quiet as it was, there was still someone here doing the right thing, not for a commission, but because it was the right thing to do. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on Lucia. A thought crossed his mind, strong enough that he knew he would make it a reality. If he was going to start over, he would start with someone like her. Elias stood for quite a while in the corner of the showroom, his eyes following Lucia as she moved gracefully between the rows of machines. Inside him, a strange mix of feelings rose. Strange because it had been so long since he had seen an employee this dedicated, yet familiar, because it was the very spirit his father had nurtured to make PureWave Systems a trusted brand. But now, all of that remained only in one quiet person, working diligently without needing anyone's recognition. Elias took a deep breath, his hands tightening around the financial report he still held. The numbers suddenly meant nothing, because he understood now that the company had lost its way, and he, the man running it, had forgotten its true foundation. He couldn't stand there any longer. He walked quickly out of the showroom, down the long hallway leading to the old storage room where his father's photo still sat, dusty but heavy with meaning. He stood before the photo for a long time, his hand resting on the scratched glass. Memories flooded back. Arthur Rowan, carefully straightening crooked machines, checking in on every employee, even spending an entire afternoon helping an elderly customer set up her unit. Elias exhaled slowly, a sentence slipping from his lips, though it sounded more like a promise to himself. "I won't let this company continue like this, Father." He removed the photo from its frame, folded it, and carefully placed it in his chest pocket, right over his heart, as a reminder to always carry it with him. Then Elias took off his expensive suit jacket, folded it neatly, and set it down on a dusty crate in the storage room. He looked at his own hands, no longer wearing the luxury watch that once symbolized power, just a man determined to start over from the very beginning. This decision didn't need an emergency meeting or a long-winded strategy plan. Elias knew well that what had rotted couldn't be fixed with numbers or polished reports. He didn't need justifications. He didn't need to make any more promises. All he needed to do was step out there and reclaim what his father had left behind. Trust. And he would start right here, right now. The next morning, the atmosphere in the large conference room of the showroom was so tense, it could be felt the moment one stepped in. The long, polished wooden table reflected the sharp white light from the ceiling. Key employees sat in rows, some whispering quietly, others leaning back with a confidence that suggested this was just another routine meeting. But when the door swung open, silence immediately swept through the room. Elias Rowan entered. This time, he was no longer the simply dressed man quietly standing in the showroom the day before. On his chest, the CEO name badge gleamed under the lights. He walked slowly, each deliberate step echoing like a steady drumbeat against everyone's rising anxiety. Colin, the one who had been live streaming yesterday, visibly paled, while Liam, the one who had intimidated customers into buying maintenance packages, tried to keep his composure, though his hands tightened under the table. Elias didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, his eyes sweeping slowly across each face. He didn't need anger or raised voices. When he spoke, his voice was low and cold, pulling the entire room into its weight. "The fact that you didn't recognize me yesterday is not important. Your real mistake was treating customers as if they didn't matter." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in, then continued, his tone steady and sharp as steel. "We can accept fluctuations in revenue. We can survive losing a few orders. But there is one thing that once lost, we will never regain: trust." Colin swallowed hard. Liam avoided his gaze. Elias didn't need to ask them a single question. What he had witnessed yesterday was enough to deliver judgment. He placed 2 thin files on the table, tapping them lightly before delivering the final words, his voice firm and final, like a door slamming shut. "You're both terminated, effective immediately." There were no excuses, no pleas. Colin lowered his head, his face pale. Liam shifted as if to speak, but Elias's piercing gaze silenced him. They stood, leaving the room in heavy silence. No one dared to look at them, because everyone understood. This was not just a punishment. It was a warning to all. Elias watched their silhouettes disappear behind the door, then turned back to those who remained. His expression was still serious, but no longer as cold. His voice was calm, deliberate, and unwavering. "From now on, this will not be a place where people work just to meet quotas. This will be a place where people work to be worthy of the trust of our customers." In the thick silence that followed, a few employees sat up straighter. In some eyes, a faint spark of determination flickered. Elias knew this was only the beginning. As the door to the conference room closed behind Colin and Liam's final steps, The atmosphere remained as tight as a drawn string. No one dared to speak. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. Elias stood still at the head of the table, his eyes sweeping over every face left in the room. He didn't need to raise his voice or give a long speech. Everyone already understood what was happening. Elias gave a slight nod, his deep, steady voice breaking the silence. Lucia Hale. The name startled a few, and at the far end of the table, Lucia herself looked up in surprise, her wide eyes betraying her confusion. "Step forward," Elias continued. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to make her rise to her feet. Slowly, she walked forward, her hands tightening together nervously. Standing before Elias, she bowed her head slightly. "Yes, sir," she said softly. He looked directly at her, his gaze no longer cold as it had been with Colin and Liam, but instead steady, with a faint warmth. "I watched you work yesterday," Elias said, every word deliberate and clear, as though meant for everyone else in the room as well. "You didn't push unnecessary services. You patiently helped a customer until she smiled, and you straightened a price tag, even when no one was watching. That is what my father taught me, and that is what this company needs." Lucia shifted nervously, her voice trembling. "But sir," she stammered, "I'm just a regular sales associate. I've never led a team before. I don't know if I'm capable." Elias allowed himself a small smile. Faint, but enough to draw the entire room into silence once again. His voice, low but firm, filled the space. "Leadership isn't about knowing the most or selling the best. Leadership is about doing what's right, even when no one is watching. And you've already done that." Lucia met his gaze, her eyes reflecting both fear and a flicker of emotion she couldn't hide. Elias nodded once more, this time with absolute certainty. "From today, you will lead this showroom team. I don't need you to be perfect right away. I only need you to keep doing what's right, and to pass that on to everyone else." A long silence followed. A few employees exchanged surprised glances. After a moment, Lucia nodded, her voice still unsteady, but now carrying a quiet determination. I'll do my best, sir." Elias regarded her, a rare smile softening his stern face. "You don't need to try to be anyone else. Just keep being who you are. That alone is enough to change this place." In that moment, the tension in the room began to ease. A few employees' expressions shifted, as if for the first time they understood that even the smallest, most ordinary actions could make a real difference. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the showroom began to shift noticeably. It was slow, almost subtle, but enough for everyone to feel it. Elias didn't appear as often as before, yet his presence lingered in every whispered conversation among the staff. Lucia stepped into her new role quietly, without speeches or rigid commands. She simply kept doing what she had always done. But this time, people around her started to notice and follow. One morning, Elias visited the store again, unannounced. He stood in a quiet corner, observing like an ordinary customer. The scene before him was nothing like what he had witnessed just days earlier. At the display counter near the entrance, a young employee bent down to pick up a fallen brochure and handed it back to an elderly man with a genuine smile. I'm sorry, sir. Let me help you choose a model that's easier to understand, he said gently, and Elias couldn't help but smile. At another row of machines, an employee was carefully straightening a tilted price tag, then wiping the dusty base of a display unit with a soft cloth. No one told him to do it, and no customers were nearby to see it. Yet he did it naturally, as if it were second nature. Across the showroom, a female employee was speaking to a young couple, no longer using fear or pressure to make a sale. Instead, she said simply, "If your household is small, this model will be more suitable and will save you on maintenance costs. You really don't need the premium package." The couple exchanged a glance before smiling gratefully, a look of relief Elias hadn't seen in his showroom for a very long time. Elias stood there, his hands in his pockets, eyes moving slowly across every corner. The actions weren't coordinated, they weren't perfect, but they were genuine. And most importantly, they were voluntary. His gaze shifted toward Lucia, who was standing at the service counter, quietly watching everything with determined eyes. She didn't command. She didn't order. She simply nodded at each employee when they did the right thing. Just a nod, but it was enough to send a clear message. What they were doing was right. Elias let out a deep breath, but this time it wasn't out of frustration or anger. It was a breath of quiet relief. In that moment, he thought of his father. "Father," he whispered in his mind, "I think we're starting to find what you were most proud of again." Elias left the showroom as the sky outside faded into the pale colors of dusk, but the light inside that store, the light he had just witnessed, continued to spread. And for the first time in many years, he truly believed that trust could be restored, not through reports or numbers, but through the efforts of these ordinary people. That morning, the showroom glowed under the sunlight streaming through the large front windows. Customers came and went, more frequently than usual. Yet the atmosphere no longer carried the tense buzz it once had. Everything moved with a quiet order, like a place where people didn't just come to buy a product, but to find peace of mind. Elias stood in a quiet corner near the entrance, observing in silence, like a stranger stepping inside for the first time. An elderly man with a thin frame, holding a receipt and an old brochure, slowly approached the service counter. His face showed a hint of hesitation, his eyes glancing around nervously. In the past, this scene might have been ignored, perhaps even dismissed. But today, Lucia quickly stepped forward. She smiled warmly and spoke gently. "Good morning, sir. Let me help you with that. You're looking for this filter, right? We still have it in stock. I'll get it for you right away." The old man looked slightly startled, then a slow smile spread across his wrinkled face. Before leaving, he said softly, his voice shaky but clear, "Thank you. This place, it feels different now." Elias stood just a few feet away, catching every word. It wasn't a flowery compliment, nor was it a remark about the product. It was something far deeper, an honest acknowledgement of the change he had longed for. He watched the old man walk slowly out the door, his gaze softening, his chest tightening. Not with soreness, but with something indescribable, like a son hearing words of encouragement from his own father, even though Arthur Rowan was no longer there to see it. Elias took a deep breath and remained still for a few more moments. He didn't step forward to greet anyone, didn't need anyone to know he was there. To him, this moment didn't need to be announced, didn't need headlines or praise-filled reports. It was silent, but powerful proof. Trust was returning, little by little. He reached into his pocket and gently touched the old photograph of his father. A thought warmed him, steady and certain. "You'd be proud, wouldn't you, Dad? This isn't just my company anymore. It's becoming our company again." Elias turned and walked out, leaving behind a showroom now filled with quiet conversations and genuine smiles. For the first time in years, he didn't see revenue numbers in his mind. What he saw was a brand coming back to life. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the clear glass panels, casting warm streaks of light across the showroom floor. Elias stood quietly in a corner, saying nothing, not intervening, simply observing like an ordinary customer. And what he saw filled him with an unfamiliar sense of relief. A young employee bent down to straighten a slightly tilted price tag, smoothing its corners with his fingers before gently wiping the dust off the base of the machine. No one had asked him to do it, and there were no customers nearby. At the center counter, a female employee smiled as she explained to a young mother cradling her baby. "If it's just the two of you, this model is perfect. It's lightweight, easy to maintain, and saves on costs. You really don't need to buy the most expensive one." The woman looked surprised for a moment, then smiled, her eyes softening. Not far away, Lucia stood with her arms loosely crossed, watching the entire scene with a steady gaze. She didn't need to give orders, didn't need to remind anyone. She simply walked over and nodded to each employee when they did something right, and those small gestures seemed to make them more confident in their work. All those little things might have seemed insignificant, but they were natural, genuine to the point Elias knew without a doubt these actions weren't born out of fear or the desire to score points. They came from willingness, from a belief in doing the right thing. Elias let out a quiet breath, his hand resting over his chest, where his father's old photograph lay tucked in his pocket. His gaze swept the room, settling on Lucia as she bent down to help a new employee arrange the display shelves. In that moment, the memory of Arthur Rowan appeared so vividly in Elias's mind. It felt as if his father were standing right there, smiling warmly, his eyes filled with trust. "You once told me, Father, a brand isn't what we promise. It's what people remember. They won't remember this month's sales numbers, but they will remember how we treated them." Elias tightened his hold on the photograph through the fabric of his shirt, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. It had been a long time since he felt this way, not as a CEO calculating reports, but as a son safeguarding his father's most precious legacy. And now he understood that this legacy didn't lie in profit margins or gleaming corporate buildings. It lived in small but sincere actions from people like Lucia. He turned and quietly left the showroom, no one noticing he had been there. But Elias knew he didn't need to show up often anymore, because change had already begun. And this time, it wasn't born from strategies or marketing campaigns. It was starting with real people, with small choices. And that was how a brand came back to life. Elias smiled faintly, closing his eyes for a brief moment as he stepped through the glass doors, almost hearing his father's familiar voice somewhere in the distance. "Son, you finally did it. A brand is not built on numbers, but on the trust of the people behind it." And only leaders who dare to listen and dare to change, starting from the smallest things, can truly keep the heart of a business. If you also believe that trust is the greatest value any company must protect, hit like and subscribe to help us share inspiring stories like this. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words, "Keep the trust," because that is the most important thing for every dream to survive.